师傅啊，我怎么睡到？
我咋知道？我已经花40年没睡会。
Hi, welcome to Qigong Project. I'm Robert Koons. Today we're going to talk about the difference between Qigong and Neigong. The reason I started Qigong Project, and really one of the reasons why I started writing and talking about these things in a public space, is because I see that there's a lot of discourse in the community which, for lack of a better word, is just inaccurate. And so one of my main goals in doing Qigong Project, rather than just being a Qigong teacher or being a meditation teacher or being a Taiji teacher or whatever, is to help to educate and lift up the standard of the community according to facts about Qigong practice and related arts that are actually true within the context of how they developed in China, rather than being some sort of made-up notion either by Western people outside of China or by even Chinese people outside or inside of China sometimes who have let's say ideas that accord with one particular lineage view to the exclusion of others, or sometimes have very superstitious views or otherwise historically inaccurate views. Now, I'm not saying, of course, that I'm the person who has the facts. What I'm saying is that because of my unique ability to read Chinese articles and documents about these things, delve into the classics, and because I've met a number of very experienced teachers to help guide me on my way to understanding, then over time I've been able to develop a pretty comprehensive view of what this stuff is all about. And so Qigong Project, more than anything, is really designed as a bulwark against bad information in the Qigong world. And to that end, then today we're going to talk about the difference between Qigong and Neigong, because this is definitely a source of much confusion. So let's get started with the absolute basics. Qigong and Neigong are both systems of practice which are designed to benefit the human body through exercise, broadly speaking. Now, Qigong and Neigong both come from earlier systems of practice. The earlier systems of practice can be broadly described as follows. Dao Yin, which means leading and stretching, so mostly involving movement-based exercises to open the body, with some caveats, which we might get to in a later video. Tu Na, breath exercises, which either emphasize inhalation-based breath-holding practices or exhalation-based practices, such as making sounds while you breathe out, and other types of breathing methods as well. Cunxiang, or visualization. So practices where you imagine something either inside your body or outside your body, or outside coming inside or inside going outside, in order to generate qi. And also dazuo, seated meditation. So approximately Qigong practice and Neigong practice can both be seen to broadly encompass various features of each of those older methods. Now, this is where things become a little bit shaky, because we have to understand what Qigong is before we try to understand anything else about this discussion. Qigong, although its proponents argue is a 1,000-year-old system, right, 2,000-plus-year-old system, actually is a very modern system. It was created in the 1950s. People set the birth date of Qigong in 1956, and it was created by a person named Liu Guizhen, along with a number of other people on a committee that was founded by the Chinese Communist Party. The story of the genesis of Qigong is that Liu Guizhen was a low-ranking official in the Communist Party, I believe based in either Beijing or Hebei province, and he became ill, like deathly ill. And so he was allowed to return back to his ancestral home in Hebei. And at that time, one of his uncles taught him their family system of Buddhist self-cultivation practices, which he called Neidan, internal nurturing skill. Now, Neidan approximately was a combination of various types of breathing methods and various types of Dao Yin stretching practices, which especially emphasized sitting in stillness while practicing breathing methods and various mental intentions. So Liu Guizhen, over the course of half a year, was able to nurse himself back to health with the help of his uncle. And when he went back to work for the Communist Party, everybody was so surprised to see him in good health, they immediately asked him what kind of magical medicine he'd been taking. So when he told them actually this was the practice that his uncle had taught him, that was an old traditional Buddhist practice, then they were really amazed. And it was agreed on that he should spearhead an initiative in the Communist Party to create a method of public health practice that would allow people to be able to get healthy without having to use medicine. You have to understand that during the early days of the revolutionary era of Chinese communism, that people did not have very much material resources or very many material resources available to them. And so things like pharmaceutical grade medicines were in relative lack. Many types of technologies, medical technologies were in relative lack. And to put it a little bit bluntly, people were a little bit poor at that time in history. And so having a kind of practice that you could use to nurture your body in order to heal yourself of illness probably seemed like a really, really good thing at that time. So the genesis of modern Qigong actually was Liu Guizhen, as well as several other people who were practicing similar arts in the Communist Party, coming together and working to create this new system, which was ultimately called Qigong. It was called Qigong because the emphasis of the practice is on cultivating qi. So we come to understand that Qigong practice is really about qi more than any other thing. So unlike, let's say, seated meditation practice from Taoism or Buddhism, which is broadly about becoming enlightened and then liberated, right, from karma and from the world, Qigong is really about cultivating qi in order to make the body more healthy. So what's in the name, right? The name Qigong really broadly explains what it actually is. And so that's the genesis of Qigong, and it developed from there. Qigong was attacked during the Cultural Revolution by the Red Guard. That doesn't mean nobody practiced Qigong. A good example of somebody who was a popular Qigong practitioner during the Cultural Revolution was Guolin of Guolin Qigong fame, famous for her Guolin Xin Qigong, the new Guolin system of Qigong, or they also call it anti-cancer Qigong, because she had cancer, she practiced Qigong, and she believed that that was the reason why she recovered from her cancer. And so people like that, and I believe also Liu Xiaobo, the creator of the Small Heavenly Orbit Qigong, were practicing Qigong prominently during the Cultural Revolution period. But broadly speaking, many Qigong teachers, including Liu Guizhen, were criticized, and Liu Guizhen unfortunately was sent to prison until the end of the Cultural Revolution, when he was allowed out and then died shortly after. So he had a very sad story in the long run, but all modern practitioners of Qigong owe great thanks to him, because he was really the person who brought this into the modern period and worked to change the practice so that everybody could do it. So that's the history of Qigong in a nutshell. It starts out in the early 1950s or the mid-1950s and is based on older practices, but it's modified in order to suit the needs of modern people who want to use it as a healthcare method. Okay, so now let's define Neigong. Neigong means inner skill. Neigong can be both a noun and also an adjective. In the sense that it's a noun which is a name for a practice. So Neigong is a practice. As an adjective, it means the person has internal skill. And this is very important because before the word Neigong was ever used to describe any kind of practices of the body, specific types of exercises, it was used in medieval times to describe having inner skill. So if you were, let's say, a martial artist and you had Neigong, it meant that you had deeply trained inner skill and you had a high expression of skill, right? Other similar terms like Shengong, spiritual skill, right? Actually, Shengong is not a type of internal practice. Shengong is only an adjective. It means a mysterious level of skill, especially applied to the martial arts, but it can be applied in other places too. So those terms initially were adjectives, and when you find them in old Chinese texts, Taoist texts, etc., or even martial arts novels like the wuxia, knight-errant novels, they're typically used as descriptors rather than names. But that all changed, probably in the 19th century, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So Neigong originally comes from martial arts practice. And the first time that the term Neigong was used in literature to describe a series of physical practices was in a text called Neigong Tu. Neigong Tu was a book that was written in the mid-19th century, and it was a description and a pictorial educational resource on the practice of Yi Jin Jing and Xi Sui Jing. So Yi Jin Jing means the tendon changing classic, and Xi Sui Jing means the marrow washing classic. These are two very important styles of modern energetic health practice, which are commonly believed to be derived from the Shaolin Temple. So the legend is that the Bodhidharma, the Indian or Nepalese monk who introduced Chan or Zen Buddhism to China, brought or created these practices at the Shaolin Temple, the Yi Sui and Yi Jin Jing, in order to make it so that the monks wouldn't fall asleep while they meditated. But although that's a popular legend, that's almost definitely not true. Actually, we know through many historical resources that the creator of the Yi Jin Jing and Xi Sui Jing was likely a person named Zining Daoren. So Zining Daoren was probably a 17th or 18th century figure who is commonly believed to, I think he lived in Tiantai mountain, but don't quote me on that. Anyway, so Zining Daoren, he might have been a Taoist, he might have been a Buddhist, and he might have just been a person in the commons. Nobody knows. Taoism lays claim to him, Buddhism lays claim to him, and also some historians say he was just a common person. But he was a practitioner of Daoyin arts, and he came up with a very unique theory about Daoyin that radically altered the progression of that style, so it would eventually become Neigong. So what does that mean? Daoyin, in the Taoist context, typically either involves sitting in a static state and doing internal and external exercises that facilitate the flow of qi and fluids in the body. As an example, clicking the teeth, circling the tongue around the inside of the mouth, swallowing the saliva, imagining guiding the saliva down to the area behind your belly button, meditating, stretching the arms and legs in various ways, rotating the body, etc. Right? So this is Daoyin broadly is based on those kind of things. However, Zining Daoren, what he thought was that Daoyin and meditation, so Da Zuo or Neidan, right, seated meditation or internal alchemy, etc., these things, they had to be paired together. If you do meditation and you don't do Daoyin, if you do meditation and you don't do physical exercises, then your body will become weak, and ultimately your meditation won't be successful because you'll end up lacking the essential strength to be able to sit and meditate for long periods of time in order to become enlightened. On the other hand, if you do Daoyin exercises but you don't meditate, then ultimately what will happen is that you won't get any spiritual enlightenment and you'll just get physically strong, but in the end you'll get sick anyway. A lot of this goes back to the Taoist belief that if you attain the golden elixir, it's possible to become immortal, right? The immortality is a spiritual immortality rather than a physical one. So Zining Daoren, he bought into that idea, and his method of meditation, Xi Sui Jing, is very similar to internal alchemy, or perhaps identical to internal alchemy. But his Daoyin method is very interesting because it does take earlier Taoist styles of Daoyin, involving sitting down and doing things with the saliva and small movements with the body and so on, and mental direction of the qi around the body. But it also combines it with martial arts stretching exercises and isometric martial arts exercises. So what do I mean by that? The original I Ching Jing at least appears to have been a number of relatively static standing postures which were based on stretching and opening the body, right? It's meant to, they say it's the tendon changing classic. Actually, I would argue that the term jin doesn't necessarily mean tenu. It means tendon. It means sinuous tissue. And so the idea is you would do these practices which would open the body in order to stretch out the various muscles and sinews, etc., of the body, and you would become naturally stronger and more relaxed. So that it looks like the original I Ching Jing was based on that. The Neigong Tu Shuo, which I discussed, right, the pictorial discussion of Neigong, came around during the 19th century. And the idea of it was to present the I Ching Jing and the Shi Sui Jing together in one book and explain it to people from the perspective of modern, but we can say like early modern practice, in order to sell more people on the idea of practicing these Neigong techniques, part of which were martial arts Neigong techniques, so holding postures, stretching, etc., part of which were silent meditation, so like the Shi Sui or the marrow changing classic, which is similar to Internal Alchemy, and part of them were classical Daoyin practices, like the seated 8 silk brocades. Now, don't get ahead of yourself there. The seated 8 silk brocades have nothing to do with the modern variation of the seated 8 silk brocades that you can find in the current Qigong infrastructure promoted by the physical health department, or we can say like the sports department of the Chinese government. The original seated 8 silk brocades actually are done in relatively static state or a relatively static posture with only a little bit of physical movement. The majority of the movement is actually inside the body, related to moving saliva around, moving qi around, using the mind to do various things, and then a little bit of stretchy stuff. But it's very, very different from the modern seated 8 silk brocades, so don't confuse them. Now, having said all that, that's roughly the contents of the Neigong Tu Shuo. However, that's just the first literary reference to Neigong. Neigong must have been around for a long time before that book was written, because otherwise, how did the author get the name for it, right? So, Neigong, as it's used in its other definition, means the warming up exercises for martial arts practice. So martial arts practice in China has two major features. One is called Neigong, and one is called Weigong, in terms of how you prepare yourself for practice. Neigong means all the stuff that you do, like stretching, any kind of internal work that you do in the martial arts is called Neigong. Weigong, or external skill, is all of the strength work that you do. So Neigong for the internal stuff like stretching and opening up the body, and Weigong for the external stuff like the strength work. And so the common understanding of Neigong in the Chinese martial arts, especially the internal martial arts, is that it's basically mostly stretching stuff, and it can have some other elements to it, standing pose, some schools have some cheerleading stuff, etc., right? You can't generalize too much about martial arts because every lineage and every style is different. But broadly speaking, Neigong is the stretchy stuff, and Weigong is the strength stuff. And so Neigong must have existed for a long time in the martial arts before the authorship of the Neigong Tu Shuo. So broadly speaking, today, when we look at what Neigong is, we can look at it through two streams. One stream is the popular stream of martial arts, in which every martial arts has a Neigong system. A lot of them use the 8 silk brocades, Ba Duan Jin, but they use the Wu Ba Duan Jin, the martial 8 silk brocades, which are the ones done while standing up, right? So they open up the body using those ones. Some other schools use the I Ching Jing, the tendon changing classic or sinew changing classic. Other schools use other ones, right? There's tons and tons of different Neigong routines. Some of them are very specific to style, right? But in any event, that's one stream. Another stream of Neigong are those practices that come from the I Ching Jing or the Neigong Tu Shuo applied outside of the context of martial arts. So a good example of that kind of practice would be a lot of modern Qigong, which is one more thing about the history of Qigong. After the end of the Cultural Revolution, Qigong underwent a giant metamorphosis and became very popular, with a lot of new styles coming out in the 1980s and 90s. But after the early 2000s, as a result of some political problems which occurred in China, Qigong was relegated to the athletic department of the Chinese government. And so new Qigong since the 2000s is mostly just physical exercise, including like 24 posture Taiji, 42 posture Taiji, I Jin Jing, Ba Duan Jin, etc. But most of them don't really practice internal Qi related practices anymore. Qigong is the name only, right? And so a lot of those people will practice I Jin Jing. They practice a variation of I Jin Jing or the sinew changing classic, which is basically just for opening up the body through stretching, approximately. So that's another sort of major way that people practice Neigong, even if they don't practice martial arts. But broadly speaking, you can't decontextualize Neigong from the martial arts. It's a practice of opening the body to cultivate internal skills, and perhaps to some extent cultivating energetic skills, which was designed by martial artists and promoted as something coming from the Shaolin Temple, as well as being part of many discrete individual martial arts from outside of Shaolin, like Taiji Chuan, Baguazhang, Xinyi Chuan, Tongbei, etc. They all have Neigong practice of some kind. So that's what Neigong is. Now, what's the difference between Neigong and Qigong? A lot of people these days promote the idea that they do Neigong, and Neigong is special and distinct and different from Qigong, and that it's better, and that it's a prerequisite to learning internal alchemy. So let's break that problem apart and see if we can't find some sort of answer to whether or not what they're saying is true. I think that I've made my point that Qigong practice is a modern practice which developed in the 1950s and then really bloomed and flourished during the 1980s and 90s. Qigong practice, I think broadly, is a practice of energetic cultivation first and foremost. So it's not a spiritual school and it's not an entirely physical school. It's about cultivating Qi, it's about repairing the body, it's about attaining health and longevity through the cultivation of Qi. Neigong, I think that I made a good point, pointing out that Neigong is derived from martial arts practice. It's mostly about opening the body for martial arts or for, physical exercise purposes, and that there are some energetic elements which are broadly taken from Taoism. Okay, and perhaps it has some relationship with meditation. So we could say that Neigong and Qigong actually are incredibly similar practices. Neigong practice, typically involves opening the body in some way, like I Jin Jing, right? But Qigong also, sometimes I Jin Jing is called a Qigong practice. So what's the difference between the sinew changing practice when you're calling it Neigong and the sinew changing practice when you're calling it Qigong? Actually, really, they're exactly the same thing. There's no difference at all, because both of them are Daoyin, right? So Daoyin, leading and stretching, an ancient Chinese art which eventually was associated with Taoism, that's about opening the body through stretching exercises that allow the qi to flow smoothly in the blood to the end of the limbs and back to the body as a result of the muscles relaxing and as a result of the joints being opened, right? Both Neigong and Qigong in that aspect are Daoyin practices. Now, on the other hand, if we say, well, what about those parts of Qigong which involve seated meditation? As an example, Fang Song Gong, relaxation skill. In Fang Song Gong, you might sit and imagine your body relaxing from head to toe, starting from the head, moving to the shoulders, to the chest, etc., all the way down to your feet. And so that's a kind of stillness practice, Jingong, right? And so that kind of practice is not, well, it could be Daoyin depending how you look at Daoyin, but really it's a kind of stillness practice. It's borrowed from the idea of meditation. Well, what about in the Neigong system from the book Neigong Tushuo, where they practice these seated skills like the 8 silk brocades, which are broadly, again, about doing internal practices where you for instance, swallow the saliva and bring it to the lower dantian, or where you imagine the activation of the qi going up the spine and down the front of the body, etc. Right? These kind of things, again, are also seated practices that are based on originally on meditation or like Taoist self-cultivation practices. So again, how different are they? Actually, they're virtually interchangeable. You could practice Neigong seated practice and move qi around and call it Qigong, or you could practice a Qigong seated practice and move qi around and use it for the purposes of Neigong, and there wouldn't be any big difference. So really, the only big difference between Neigong and Qigong is just that typically the majority of people who do Neigong are martial artists, because they use it to open their bodies and they use it to cultivate themselves internally for martial arts purposes. That's really the only difference. Qigong may be practiced by martial artists, but it's also potentially practiced by anybody who just wants to do a little bit of relatively relaxed exercise and feel more healthy while they cultivate their internal energy. So broadly speaking, there's actually no big difference between Neigong and Qigong. It's really just in the name, right? You could argue that Qigong focuses more on qi than Neigong does, and Neigong focuses more on opening the body than Qigong. I think that's the only major argument to be made. But again, there's always caveats, because there's plenty of Qigong systems which emphasize flexibility. And at the end of the day, that's really what those Neigong isometric exercises are about, is cultivating physical flexibility paired with a little bit of strength, right? But for the real strength, that's the Weigong, that's the external practice. Okay, so that's the difference between them. There's not much of a difference. Now, is Neigong better than Qigong? Well, I think I just answered that question. No, right? There's not a big enough difference to say one is better than the other. If you want to be really good at cultivating qi, my suggestion would be that you seek out a good Qigong system like Zhineng Qigong or Dayan Qigong, Xianggong, right? Any of these really good systems that got a lot of their development during the 80s and 90s, they're exceptionally good for cultivating qi. Neigong, of course, also, right? Because some of the old practices like the seated Baduanjin, the seated 8 silk brocades, are fantastic for cultivating qi. It's done in a very Taoist way compared to, those modern styles of Qigong, which are really a mixture of a lot of different sources of practice. They could have Taoist parts, Buddhist parts, Confucian parts from Chinese medicine, even Western stuff like the idea of an aura. Is that a Western idea? I don't know. I read a little bit about it. It just talks about the idea of the aura being developed during the 19th century, I think, in the West. But anyway, I'm not here to try to figure out questions like that. I'm here to talk about Qigong. So even ideas like the aura were brought into Qigong from outside, or the idea of somatic, right? Somatic studies were brought into Qigong from other places. And so, broadly speaking, Neigong, depending, if you really study the old-fashioned one, you might make the argument that it's more traditional or something like that, but I don't know. That's not a really good argument. I don't believe that Neigong is better than Qigong. Depending on your goals, you may be more suited to studying one or the other, or you may be more suited to studying one part of one of the schools more than any other part, right? That's the truth about those things. Now, the next one is, do you have to study Neigong to study internal alchemy, right? Now, I'm an internal alchemy practitioner. I've been studying internal alchemy I've been studying Taoism since about 2011, and I've been studying internal alchemy approximately the same amount of time. And I also have studied Qigong and Neigong for more than 20 years, I think 22 years now. And I have to say, generally speaking, that there's absolutely no prerequisite of that kind to study internal alchemy. You don't have to be good at physical exercise to study meditation. There's no connection there. Studying exercise could be good for helping you learn to meditate because you know how to focus, right? So that could be really good. But on the other hand, it's not an absolute prerequisite, right? It's something that could benefit you maybe. Now, I want to say that this is one of my personal big pet peeves, right? This idea that you have to study XXX type of isometric exercise for a decade and really have a profound understanding of it to be able to study internal alchemy. Actually, that's just complete hogwash. there's a couple of teachers that say that. And here's what I think, okay? Having looked at the situation good and hard, I think that what that's actually about is guiding students through a sales funnel. Okay, now listen, I've studied a bit of marketing too. If you want to be successful doing this kind of business, it's really useful to understand marketing. But you can't become a victim to marketing, okay? And so I'm going to explain what I think this is really about. When a person says, you should study Neigong for 10 years. There's so much to the system. You got to stand in standing post for a certain period of time. You have to do stretchy stuff for a certain period of time. You have to do specialized breathing and intention practices. And it's all laid out in a very specific curriculum. Of course, you can buy every part online step by step. Am I shooting myself in the foot? What if I start a curriculum in the future? Anyway, but really, this is the truth, okay, guys, is that this idea of carrying you through a step-by-step program that ultimately results in you getting some sort of very special thing, which is internal alchemy practice after you've studied for a certain number of years, is actually about setting up a goal in your mind, right? What it's about is setting up a telos, right? So like setting up the idea of a final result, right? The final result is, oh my God, after I master the Neigong and I do the martial arts and I do all that stuff, I'll be good at it. I'll be strong. I'll be a man. Because unfortunately, let's be honest, a lot of this stuff is in the manosphere. Then I can study meditation and I can become enlightened. And it's just not like that, okay? But the reason why they set it up like that is because that way they can keep taking money from you for a decade or maybe longer, right? So it's not anything about what you have to do to be prepared to do the practice. Neidan is a very easy practice, okay? Internal alchemy is a very easy practice. You just need to know a little bit about the theory and you can start practicing. Then the only reason why you would keep studying is because you want to deepen your understanding. It's like studying Buddhism or Hinduism, right? It's not about adding extra stuff for a price. It's about deepening your knowledge and appreciating more and understanding what the stages of meditation and the stages of realization are supposed to be. That's how it works. It's not like more and more and more stuff, because that's the opposite of Taoism. In the Tao Te Ching, it says, if you want to know the Tao, every day subtract. It's not you want to know the Tao every day, add extra stuff. So in my opinion, really that Neigong to meditation thing is a sales funnel, right? It's actually a repeated sales funnel where they keep bringing you through it. They bring you into the consideration stage because they say, I've got this great thing, and you have to follow a process to get there, right? Then they bring you into the consideration to the decision phase by the idea that there's something extra you can get later after that. And then they keep repeating the cycle. You know, what do they say? Wash, rinse, repeat, right? And so unfortunately, that's the way it is in this self-cultivation online world. And there's nothing you can do about it. So that maybe that's a bit of an uncharitable view, though, right? There could be another thing going on. I'm willing to, you know, potentially consider the idea that there could be something else going on. And the other thing that could be going on is that the people who push that Neigong to Neidan pipeline are people who really like the I Ching Jing, right? So they're people who like the, let's say, tendon changing classic or sinew changing classic, and they like the marrow washing classic, right? The Shi Sui Jing. And so people who studied using that model, they're already programmed to think, if I don't study Neigong, if I don't make my body healthy and robust, then I won't have a good basis for enlightenment, right? I won't have a good basis for meditation. And so I have to study the Neigong, and then I can study the meditation, right? I think that could also be their line of thinking. But it's always so hard to know, right? Because when people study hobbies and when that hobby studies a career, there's so many things that they have to think about. Me too, okay? I'm just gonna be honest, me too, right? You have to think about a lot of stuff when you want to do this as a career. And so I do believe that that's, you know, perhaps in the beginning, that many of those people who started down that rabbit hole, that was their view because of the fact that they studied I Ching Jing as the major method of Neigong that they studied, right? And so at the end, well, I mean, they never say that, by the way, in the Neigong Tu Shuo or the I Ching Jing. It doesn't say you have to finish the Neigong program, then you can study the Shi Sui Jing. It just says you should practice Neigong and Shi Sui together. But anyway, this is how it ended up working, right? It's the majority of these guys think that you should do Neigong for a certain period of time, get through the whole practice, and then you can do the meditation part. But I'm telling you now, as a long-term Qigong, Neigong, and Neidan practitioner, that's not true. You can practice meditation without knowing any physical exercises, although I do strongly encourage you to do physical exercises because that's a good way to keep your health, right? Keep your body healthy. It's just like meditation is a good way to balance your mind, right? So anyway, broadly speaking, I think that answers those questions, right? We know what Qigong is. Qigong is a relatively modern health art that focuses on Qi, that's based on older Taoist, Buddhist, and Chinese medicine ideas, as well as a lot of modern scientific and medical ideas. We know that Neigong developed from the martial arts, and it became popular within the martial arts, but also perhaps in other circles as a result of it being good for strengthening and opening the body, and, you know, for some energetic purposes. And we know that Neigong and Qigong, because they're borrowed from the same sources, which are basically Daoyin and breathing practices and meditation practice, if they're not exactly the same thing, they're pretty darn similar, and they're pretty darn interchangeable. And then finally, we know that you don't have to master either Neigong or Qigong to be able to learn meditation, although it can't hurt, right? So I hope that that was beneficial to you. This video was a little bit longer than usual. Now, what I'm going to do is hit the gym and do some deadlifts. Yeah. Not very Qigong of me, I know. But anyway, that's really what I'm going to do. And so I'm so glad that you joined me here at Qigong Project to watch all of my rants. I hope that you think that they're useful. And I hope that also in the future, our discussion about these things can become more and more nuanced and more real. Because often things which we hold to be sort of the doctrine of these systems is just made up. You know, yeah. Even if you go back to Ning Daoren, right, the creator or the person who transmitted, let's say, the I Ching Jing and Shi Sui Jing, you know, he just made up the idea. It was based on his observation that you had to learn, let's say, Neigong practices in order to be able to meditate well, and you had to be able to meditate well in order for the Neigong practices to be useful. That was his idea. Other people had different ideas. Hey, listen, Zhang Boduan, the founder of Internal Alchemy, you know what he said? He said, tiring the body by massaging and stretching and imagining that you're eating the sunset will all make you insane. So he was saying the exact opposite. He was saying, hey, listen, all those stretching and Qigong practices that you're doing, those things are actually bad for meditation. They actually make it harder to learn meditation because they make you have too many attachments, and they make it so that you don't know how to let go properly so that the qi can do its own job, right? But again, that's just his idea. But that was a very popular idea in Taoism for hundreds of years, right? From the time that Zining Daoren wrote the I Ching Jing and Shi Sui Jing until now, and from the time that Zhang Boduan criticized those kind of practices until, you know, let's say, Zining Daoren wrote the I Ching Jing, was actually a longer period of time. Like, those practices were unpopular in Neidan for hundreds of years. And it was longer than the idea that you have to practice Daoyin to be able to do Neidan has been popular. I hope that makes sense to you, right? So you have to, like, when you're studying these arts, I know that the tendency is, you like your teacher, or you like this person who's a big mascot for these things, very popular figures, and you think that whatever they say is just true. But listen, it's hard to find out the truth about these things. You have to do a lot of digging, and it's hard to do that digging exclusively in English. There's a lot of digging to be done in Chinese, and you have to talk to experts, right? So it's not like the easiest thing in the world to really understand these things. And if you want to be part of a lineage perspective, you want to do things according to the way that, your teachers and they say the way the ancients did them and so on and so forth, that's perfectly fine. But if you really want to refine your knowledge about these things, you have to dig, and you have to go through a lot of, BS before you find what's real. Now, having said that, right, I'm not asking you to just automatically accept what I'm saying either. There's of course I'm wrong about something, right? How could I not be? I'm a human being, right? Just like you, and just like all of those experts. So that's really what I'm trying to say. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me again. I really appreciate it. It's nice to see that we're developing a small community here. So keep those comments coming in the comment section. Share your wisdom with me. And if you have questions, ask questions. And hit like and subscribe because, it really helps with the algorithm. Okay? Anyway, I don't have anything else to say. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time.